My parents are successful and rich, unlike you who is poor." Chloe laughed as she said it, with that laugh that sounded like breaking glass. We were all sitting around the dining room table, and the silence that followed was so thick I could feel it pressing against my chest. I slowly leaned back in my chair, folded my hands in my lap, and took a deep breath before answering with a calm I didn't even know I possessed. "Then I'm going to stop sending you money and paying the mortgage on their house. Now it's their problem." I watched my son Ryan's face transform in 2 seconds. The blood drained from his cheeks. His eyes went wide, like he'd just seen a car crash. His mouth opened, and the words came out shaky, almost inaudible. "What money?" His voice cracked. "What mortgage?" Chloe stopped laughing. The fork she was holding hung suspended in the air, halfway between her plate and her mouth. She looked at me as if I had just spoken another language, as if the words I had said couldn't possibly be real. And in that moment, in that precise instant when everyone was looking at me, waiting for me to say it was a joke, I knew my life was about to be split into a before and an after. But let me tell you how we got here, because this story didn't begin that afternoon. It began 3 years ago, when my husband died and left me alone in a house that was too big, with too many memories and a bank account that he had built with decades of honest work. It began when I decided that my son shouldn't have to suffer, that I could help him without anyone knowing, without him feeling like less of a man for receiving support from his mother. Ryan was always a good son, hard-working, respectful, with that kind heart he got from his father. But life doesn't always reward kindness with prosperity. He worked at a logistics company, a decent job, but one that was barely enough to live on with any dignity in this city where everything costs twice what it's worth. When he met Chloe 5 years ago, I saw his eyes light up in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. She was beautiful, educated, always dressed like she was at a photo shoot. She came from a family that, according to her, had properties, businesses, connections. The first time he brought her to my house, I noticed how she looked at my living room, how her eyes scanned the old furniture, the sun-faded curtains, the photographs in simple frames. She didn't say anything, but her expression said it all. I wasn't good enough. My simple life wasn't good enough. And by extension, my son wasn't good enough either. But Ryan was in love. And when you love someone, sometimes you don't see the signs that others see clearly. They got married a year later, in a ceremony that Chloe's parents arranged in an elegant ballroom downtown. I sat in the 3rd row, in my beige dress that I had bought at a discount store, and watched as Richard and Cynthia, her parents, greeted the guests like royalty. Richard, with his impeccable gray suit, Cynthia with jewelry that sparkled so much it almost blinded you. They talked about their businesses, their travels, their property on the coast, and I kept quiet, because that's what I had learned to do my whole life. Keep quiet, keep the peace, don't cause trouble. My husband used to tell me I was the invisible glue of the family, the one who held everything together without anyone noticing. And he was right. Because after his death, when I reviewed our finances with the accountant, I discovered there was more money than I had imagined. Properties we had bought decades ago that were now worth much more. Modest investments that had grown over time. Nothing extravagant, nothing that made you rich, but enough to live peacefully and to help my only son. 6 months after the wedding, Ryan came to visit me one afternoon. He looked nervous, restless, with those dark circles that appear when worries don't let you sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had eaten breakfast his entire childhood, and told me that he and Chloe wanted to buy a house, that they had found a perfect one, but they needed $60,000 for the down payment, that the bank had approved them for the loan, but without that initial down payment, they couldn't close the deal. "You don't have to do it, Mom," he told me, his voice full of shame. "I know it's a lot of money. I just wanted to know if maybe you could lend us something. Anything. We'll pay you back. I promise." I looked him in the eye, those eyes I had known since he first opened them in the hospital, and I knew I couldn't tell him no. I knew that if I had worked my whole life, if I had saved and sacrificed, it was precisely for moments like this. So my son could have a roof of his own, so he could build a family without the anxiety of monthly rent, without the fear of a landlord deciding to sell and leaving them on the street. "It's not a loan," I told him. "It's a gift. But there's one condition. Ryan looked at me with hope and relief mixed on his face. Tell Chloe where the money came from. I want her to know that her mother-in-law, even if she wears simple clothes and lives in a modest house, can also help. I want her to understand that success isn't always measured in appearances. Ryan nodded. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and I thought that would be the end of the story. That my daughter-in-law would know, that maybe she would see me differently, that there would be gratitude and respect. How naive I was, how incredibly naive. 2 weeks after giving Ryan the money, I went to visit them at their new house. I brought a basil plant in a clay pot, because I knew Chloe liked to cook with fresh herbs. I rang the doorbell and waited, feeling the afternoon sun warm my back. When Chloe opened the door, her smile was radiant, but her eyes didn't really look at me. They looked through me, as if I were part of the scenery. "Eleanor, what a surprise," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "Ryan is still at work. He's late today." I walked into the living room and was impressed. Light wood floors, modern furniture in pearl gray, a huge television hanging on the wall. Everything looked like it was out of a design magazine. Chloe offered me coffee, and we sat on the new sofa that still smelled new. We talked about trivial things, the weather, the traffic, the neighbors in the building. But I was waiting. I was waiting for her to say something about the money, about my help, about how that down payment had made everything we were seeing possible. She never mentioned it. Half an hour passed, then an hour. We talked about her parents, about how Richard had just closed a big deal, about how Cynthia had remodeled her kitchen with imported marble. We talked about everything except the one thing I wanted to hear. When I said goodbye and walked to the bus stop, I felt a knot in my stomach that I couldn't ignore. But I told myself that maybe Ryan hadn't found the right moment to tell her yet. That maybe he wanted to wait until everything was completely settled. I convinced myself there was a reasonable explanation. That night, I called Ryan. I tried to be subtle, not to sound like a meddling mother. "I went to visit you guys today. The house looks beautiful." "Yeah, Mom, we're really happy," he answered, but his voice sounded tired, tense. "Did you tell Chloe about the money?" There was a long silence. Too long. "Mom, it's complicated. Chloe is very proud. Her parents have always given her everything. And if she knows we needed help, she's going to feel that I'm not enough for her. Do you understand?" I didn't understand. But when you're a mother, sometimes you accept things you don't understand because you want to protect your son's happiness. You want to believe he knows what he's doing, that his marriage is his business, that you're just there to support from a distance. "I just don't want her to think we're hiding things," I said softly. "We're not hiding it. We're just waiting for the right time. I promise I'll tell her. Just give me a little more time." I gave him time. Months. And during those months, I kept visiting them occasionally. I kept listening to Chloe talk about her successful parents, their properties, their thriving businesses. I kept watching her treat me with that cold politeness you use for someone you tolerate, but don't respect. She was never rude. She never disrespected me directly. But there was something in her tone, in the way she smiled when I arrived with my Tupperware containers of homemade food, in how she compared everything I did to what her parents did. My mother cooks too, but she has a huge kitchen with professional appliances. She says it's more efficient that way. My father always says you have to invest in quality. That's why he bought his imported car, because it will last for decades. Little barbs wrapped in velvet, little comparisons that constantly reminded me I wasn't up to her standard. And I put up with it because I loved my son, because I didn't want to be the problem mother-in-law, the one who causes divisions in the marriage. But then Ryan came to see me again, 6 months after buying the house. This time, his face showed more than just nervousness. It showed desperation. "Mom, I need to ask you for another favor, a big one." He sat in the same kitchen chair and explained that the monthly mortgage payment was higher than they had calculated, that his salary barely covered basic expenses, that Chloe wasn't working because she was looking for the perfect job, something worthy of her education and abilities, that they needed help with the monthly payments, just temporarily, just until he got a raise or she found a job. "How much do you need?" I asked, although I already knew the answer was going to hurt. $2,000 a month. I know it's a lot. I know I'm asking for too much. $2,000 a month. $24,000 a year. I did the math in my head. I could do it. My rental income and my pension allowed for it. But something inside me resisted. Something told me this wasn't right, that I was crossing an invisible line. Ryan, does Chloe know you're asking me for this? Again, that uncomfortable silence. No, and I'd rather she didn't. She already feels bad enough that I don't earn enough. If she knows my mother is supporting us, it will be worse. Please, Mom, just for a little while, I swear. And there I was again, trapped between my instincts and my mother's love, between what I knew was right and what my heart was asking me to do. I agreed. Of course I agreed. Because when you see your son with eyes full of anguish, when you know he's struggling to keep his life together, you do the impossible to help him, even when you know it's probably a mistake. Every month, religiously, I transferred $2,000 to Ryan's account. He would send me messages thanking me, promising that things would get better soon. And I kept visiting them, kept cooking for them, kept listening to Chloe talk about everything she had, everything her parents had given her, how lucky she was to have such a successful family. All while I, the poor mother-in-law, the one who lived in a modest house and wore clothes from past seasons, was financially supporting the perfect life she was showing off. A year went by like that. Then two, and things didn't get better. Ryan was still at the same job, earning the same. Chloe still hadn't found that perfect job. I still needed my $2,000 a month. And I continued to be invisible in my own act of generosity. I began to feel something I had never felt before toward my daughter-in-law. It wasn't hatred. Hatred is too strong, too active. It was something colder, deeper. It was disappointment mixed with resentment, a combination that settled in my chest like a slowly growing stone. But I kept the peace. I swallowed my words. I smiled when I had to smile, because that's what I had done my whole life. Keeping the peace meant swallowing your own voice. And I had perfected that art until it became second nature, until that afternoon, until that moment when Chloe decided my silence was permission to humiliate me. We had been talking about a trip they were planning, something about a week in Cancun, an all-inclusive resort. I commented, without thinking much, that it sounded wonderful but expensive. And that's when Chloe let out that laugh that would change everything. Eleanor, when you have a successful family, these expenses aren't a problem. My parents are successful and rich, unlike you who is poor. That's why they can afford these luxuries and help us when we need it. The room fell silent. Ryan had frozen, his fork halfway to his mouth. And I, after 3 years of swallowing words, of being invisible, of supporting a life she didn't even know I was supporting, decided that was enough. I leaned back in the chair and felt something strange course through my body. It was as if all those years of silence, of swallowing words, of smiling when I should have been crying, had concentrated into a single point inside my chest. And now that point was about to explode. But it didn't explode with screams or tears. It exploded with something much more powerful, with the truth spoken calmly. Then I'm going to stop sending you money and paying the mortgage on their house. Now it's their problem. The words left my mouth with a serenity I didn't even recognize in myself. I didn't shout them. I didn't spit them out with rage. I pronounced them with the same tranquility one uses to announce that there will be a tomorrow. And maybe that's what made them more devastating. The calm, the absolute control in my voice as I watched Chloe's world begin to crumble before her very eyes. Ryan dropped his fork. The sound of the metal on the ceramic echoed in the silence like a gunshot. His face lost all its color. His lips moved, but no sound came out at first. And then, finally, that question that would change everything. What money? His voice sounded hollow, distant, as if coming from the bottom of a well. What mortgage? Chloe was staring at me. Her expression had gone from mockery to confusion in a matter of seconds. The arrogant smile she'd had moments before was frozen on her face like a poorly fitted mask. What is she talking about? She asked, looking first at Ryan and then at me. Ryan, what is your mother talking about? But Ryan couldn't speak. He was looking at me with a mixture of panic and pleading, like a child who has just been caught doing something forbidden. And in that moment, I understood something terrible. My son had never planned to tell his wife the truth. Never. He wasn't waiting for the right time. He was simply hoping I would remain invisible forever. "Ryan," I said softly, still with that calm that surprised even me. "I think it's time you told your wife who paid the $60,000 for the down payment on this house, and who has been paying $2,000 a month for the last 3 years to cover the mortgage that you two can't afford on your own." I watched the words hit Chloe like invisible slaps. Her mouth opened slightly. Her eyes, those eyes that had always looked at me with condescension, now showed something I had never seen in them: genuine shock. "That can't be true," she whispered. Then she turned to Ryan with more force. "Ryan, tell her that's not true." Ryan had his hands on the table, his knuckles white from the pressure. He was breathing fast, too fast. When he spoke, his voice came out broken. "Chloe, I was going to tell you. I really was. Tell me what?" Chloe's voice rose an octave. "Tell me what, exactly, Ryan?" "That my mom helped us with the down payment." "And what?" "That she's been helping us with the monthly payments. Because my salary wasn't enough." "And you?" "And I what?" Chloe stood up. Her hands were shaking. "Finish that sentence, Ryan. And I what?" "And you don't work?" I finished the sentence for him. My voice was still calm, almost gentle. "You've been looking for the perfect job for 3 years, Chloe. In the meantime, I've been paying for this house. This house you live in. This house you brag about. This house you think is proof of your success." Chloe stared at me as if she had just seen a ghost. And maybe that's what I had been to her all this time. A ghost. A presence she tolerated, but never truly saw. Someone who existed in the margins of her perfect life, useful only for filling space at family gatherings. "I don't believe you," she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. "My parents would have told me if you needed help." I opened my purse, that worn leather purse I had used for years, and took out my phone. My fingers, trembling now for the first time in the whole conversation, navigated to my banking app. I turned the phone around and placed it on the table, in front of Chloe. "Here's the $60,000 transfer I made 3 years ago. And here are the monthly transfers of $2,000. Every month, without fail, for 36 months, $72,000 in total. You can check the dates, the amounts, everything." Chloe leaned over the table and looked at the screen. I watched her eyes scan the numbers, the dates, the bank confirmations. Her face went through a dozen expressions in a matter of seconds. Disbelief, confusion, rage, shame. When she looked up, she was no longer looking at me with condescension. She was looking at me with something much more complex, something that looked like a mixture of humiliation and fury. "Ryan," she said without taking her eyes off me, "tell me this is some kind of horrible joke." "It's not a joke," he replied in a barely audible voice. "Mom has been helping us because I don't earn enough, because we needed help. And I didn't tell you because I knew you would feel bad, that you would think I wasn't capable of maintaining this house." "That I would feel bad?" Chloe turned to him, and for the first time, I saw something break in her perfect facade. "That I would feel bad? Ryan, you've been lying to me for 3 years. Every time you told your mother to come visit, every time she brought food, every time I talked about our accomplishments in front of her, you knew. You knew she was paying for all of this, and you let me make a fool of myself." "I didn't want you to feel less," Ryan tried to explain, standing up too. "Your parents have always had so much. They've always given you everything, and I just wanted you to have the same. For you not to feel like you had chosen badly by marrying me." Chosen badly. Chloe let out a bitter laugh, nothing like that mocking laugh from before. "Chosen badly? What I chose badly was to trust you. What I did wrong was to believe this life was real, that we had built it together. And it turns out we've been living off your mother's charity this whole time. Off the woman I. Off the woman I." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. We all knew what she was going to say. Off the woman I had looked down on. Off the woman I had treated as if she were less. Off the woman whose money had been supporting my fantasy life while I bragged about a wealth that was never mine. I stood up slowly. My knees protested a bit, but I held steady. I put my phone back in my purse and closed it with a soft click that resonated in the tense silence of the room. "It wasn't charity," I said, looking Chloe directly in the eyes. "It was love. It was a mother helping her son because that's what mothers do. But there was a condition, a single condition. I asked Ryan to tell you the truth. To be honest with you about where the money was coming from, because I didn't need your gratitude, Chloe, but I did deserve your respect. And instead, for 3 years, you've treated me like I'm invisible. As if my simple life was a cause for pity. As if the fact that I don't brag about wealth means I have no value. Eleanor, I didn't." Chloe started, but I held up a hand. "Let me finish. I've listened for 3 years. Now it's my turn to speak. I've listened to you talk about your successful parents, about their properties, their businesses, everything they have and everything they've given you. And I never said anything because I didn't want to cause problems, because I wanted my son to be happy, because I believed that the love I felt for Ryan was reason enough to stay quiet while you made me feel small with every visit." Tears began to roll down Chloe's cheeks, but I couldn't stop now. 3 years of unsaid words were looking for a way out. But today, you crossed a line. Today you decided my humility was weakness, that my silence was permission to humiliate me openly. And in that moment, I decided I'm not going to be invisible anymore. I'm not going to keep paying for a life you don't even appreciate, in a house where I'm not respected. I walked toward the front door with slow, steady steps. Each step echoed in the absolute silence my words had left behind. I could feel their gazes fixed on my back, the weight of the truth that had just exploded in the middle of that perfectly decorated living room. My hand touched the doorknob, that cold metal that somehow anchored me to the reality of what I had just done. "Mom, wait." Ryan's voice sounded desperate, broken. "Please, don't leave like this. We can talk about this. We can fix it." I stopped, but I didn't turn around. If I looked him in the eye right then, if I saw the pain on his face, I might weaken. And I couldn't afford to be weak now. Not after I had finally found my voice. "There's nothing to fix. Ryan, you made decisions. You decided to lie to your wife for 3 years. You decided to turn me into your secret, your silent accomplice in a lie I never asked to keep. And now you both have to live with the consequences of those decisions. But you can't cut off the money just like that." It was Chloe speaking now, and her voice had lost all the arrogance that characterized it. She sounded scared, vulnerable. "This house, the mortgage, we can't pay it without your help. They'll foreclose. We're going to lose everything." I turned then, slowly. I looked at both of them standing in the middle of that living room I had helped buy. Ryan with red eyes, his hands trembling at his sides. Chloe with her mascara running, her hands covering her mouth as if she could stop the words that had already come out. "Your parents are successful and rich. Chloe, according to your own words, from just 10 minutes ago, I'm sure they'll be able to help you. After all, isn't that what successful families do? Help their children." I saw something break in Chloe's eyes. A small crack at first, but one that spread quickly. She opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Just a choked sound, as if the words were stuck in her throat. "They can't," she whispered finally. "My parents can't help us right now. They're going through a complicated time with their businesses." "How convenient," I replied, with no emotion in my voice. "How incredibly convenient that right now, when you need me, it turns out the successful family can't help. Mom, please." Ryan took a step toward me. "I know I made a mistake. A huge mistake. But you can't punish us like this. You can't just let us fall like this. Punish you." I repeated the word as if it were the first time I'd heard it. "I'm not punishing you, Ryan. I'm simply stopping carrying a weight that should never have been mine. Your marriage, your house, your finances, they are your responsibility, not mine. For 3 years, I took on a responsibility that wasn't mine, and I did it out of love. But love cannot exist where there is no respect. And tonight, it became very clear that I am not respected in this house." "I respect you," Ryan said, his voice cracking. "Mom, I respect you. I love you. You're the most important thing to me. If that were true, you wouldn't have made me your shameful secret. If that were true, you would have defended my honor when your wife belittled me on every visit. If that were true, you would have been honest from the beginning. Chloe sank onto the sofa, that pearl gray sofa that had probably cost more than I spent in 6 months. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry. It wasn't a delicate cry. It was a desperate, guttural sob, the cry of someone watching their world fall apart. "I'm sorry," she said between sobs. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. You're right. I treated you horribly. I was arrogant and cruel, and you have no idea how much I regret it now. But please, please don't do this to us. We're family." "A family is built on honesty," I replied, "and there has been no honesty here, only secrets, lies, and appearances. You built a cardboard life, painted gold, and now that the rain is falling, you're discovering that cardboard dissolves." I opened the door. The cool night air hit my face, and for a moment I felt like I could breathe fully for the first time in hours. Before leaving, I turned one last time. "You have until the end of the month. I will make the last transfer of $2,000 for this month because I don't want you to lose the house immediately. That gives you 30 days to find a solution. Get additional jobs. Sell the car if you have to. Ask Chloe's successful parents for help. Or better yet, recognize that you're living beyond your means and find something more in line with your reality. But whatever you decide to do, you'll have to do it without my money." "Mom." Ryan tried to get closer but stopped halfway, as if an invisible wall were holding him back. "And Ryan," I added, looking directly at him, "the next time you want to help someone you love, don't make it a secret. Secrets rot everything they touch, and this secret rotted your marriage from the very first day." I left and closed the door behind me. The sound was final, like the closing of a chapter. I walked to the street where I had parked my car, that old but reliable car I had bought 10 years ago and that still ran perfectly. My hands were shaking when I took the keys out of my purse. Not from fear or regret. They were shaking from the adrenaline of having done something I should have done a long time ago. I sat in the driver's seat and closed my eyes. The tears started to fall then, now that I was alone, now that no one could see me. They weren't tears of sadness exactly. They were tears of release. Of 3 years of holding back, of biting my tongue, of making myself small so others could feel big. I cried for the relationship with my daughter-in-law that never was and probably never would be. I cried for my son, who had chosen the easy path of lies instead of the hard path of truth. And I cried for myself, for the woman who had been strong enough to support others but had forgotten to support herself. When I finally started the car and began to drive back to my house, I felt something strange in my chest. It took me several minutes to recognize it because it had been so long since I'd felt it. It was peace. A strange peace, tinged with sadness, but peace nonetheless, for the first time in 3 years. I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to smile when I wanted to cry. I didn't have to be invisible. I got to my house, that modest house with its faded curtains and old furniture, the same house that Chloe had looked at with disdain the first time he brought her to meet me. I went in and turned on the living room lights. Everything was exactly where I had left it. The photographs of my husband on the mantel, the hand-woven rug my mother had given me decades ago, the books piled next to the sofa because I never had enough shelves for all of them. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my favorite armchair, the one that was a little sunken on the left side from so much use. I took the first sip and let the warmth spread through my body. My phone vibrated. A message from Ryan. I didn't open it. Then another. And another. 5 messages in total. I left them unread. Not because I was cruel, but because I knew that if I read them, if I saw his desperate apologies, I might weaken. And I couldn't allow that. Not yet. That night, I slept better than I had in months. And when I woke up the next morning, with the sun streaming through my bedroom window, I knew something fundamental had changed. I had recovered something I had lost without even realizing it. My dignity. And although the price had been high, although I knew the next few weeks would be difficult, I didn't regret it. Because sometimes, loving someone means stopping rescuing them. And sometimes, respecting yourself means you stop being invisible. It was 5 days before Ryan showed up at my door. 5 days in which my phone didn't stop vibrating with messages I refused to read. 5 days in which I dedicated myself to my simple routines. watering the plants, reading the books I had postponed, cooking just for myself for the first time in years. There was something strangely liberating about preparing a small portion of soup, in not having to think about anyone else's tastes, in eating when I was hungry and not when the clock dictated it was time for family dinner. But that Thursday afternoon, when I heard the doorbell, I knew who it was before I opened it. A mother always knows. I opened the door and there was Ryan, in the same clothes he wore to work but wrinkled, as if he had slept in them. He had deep dark circles and a multi-day beard that made him look older than his 35 years. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke on that single word. I stepped aside and let him pass. I didn't say anything. I just closed the door and walked to the kitchen, where I had fresh coffee. I poured him a cup without asking if he wanted one. He sat at the table in his usual spot and wrapped his hands around the mug as if he needed the warmth to keep from falling apart. "Chloe left," he said finally. "She went to her parents' house 3 days ago. She says she needs time to think, that she can't be in that house knowing that every brick is a lie." I sat across from him, but said nothing. I had learned that sometimes silence is the most eloquent answer. Everything is falling apart. "Mom, at work they offered me overtime, but it's not enough. I did the math and even working 14 hours a day, I can't cover the full mortgage. The house. We're going to lose the house. And maybe that's what we deserve." "Maybe," I replied softly. Not with cruelty, but with the honesty our relationship had needed for years. Ryan looked up, surprised by my direct response. But then he nodded slowly. "You're right. We deserve to lose everything. I deserve to lose everything. I used you, Mom. I turned you into my easy solution and I didn't even have the courage to be honest about it. And the worst part is, I let Chloe treat you the way she did. Every time she made those comments, every time she compared her family to ours, I just stayed quiet. Because if I defended you, I would have to admit the truth." "And now what?" I asked. "Are you here to ask for forgiveness? Or are you here to ask for money?" The question was harsh, I know. But I needed to know. I needed to understand if my son was finally growing up or if he was just looking for another crutch. "I'm here to ask for forgiveness," he replied, and the tears began to roll down his cheeks. "Just that. I don't expect you to forgive me today or tomorrow. Maybe you'll never forgive me. But I needed you to know that I understand what I did. I understand that I failed you not just as a son, but as a human being. And if I lose the house, if Chloe leaves me, if I lose everything, it's the price I have to pay for being a coward." Something in my chest softened. Not completely, but enough. I reached my hand across the table and touched his. It was cold, trembling. "I forgive you," I said, and I watched his shoulders shake with a sob he had been holding in. "But forgiving you doesn't mean we go back to where we were. Things have changed, Ryan. I've changed. I'm not going to be the invisible solution to your problems anymore. I'm not going to stay quiet when I should speak." "I know," he whispered, "and that's okay. It's more than okay. It's what should have happened years ago." We sat in silence for a long time, drinking coffee, with no need to fill every second with words. And in that silence, I felt something begin to heal. Not everything. Not yet. But it was a start. That night, after Ryan left, I kept thinking about Chloe, about that successful and rich family she bragged so much about. Something in the whole story didn't add up. If they really had so much money, why hadn't Chloe asked her parents for help in all these years? Why had she accepted living in a precarious financial situation when she supposedly had access to all that family wealth? The next day, I called Arthur. Arthur had been my husband's friend for decades. He was a lawyer, specializing in real estate and corporate finance. We had kept in touch after my husband's death, with occasional calls and lunches every few months. "Eleanor, what a surprise," he said when he answered. "How are you?" "I need a favor, Arthur, and I need your absolute discretion." There was a pause. "You're worrying me." "What's going on?" I told him the story. Not all the details, but enough. I gave him the names of Chloe's parents, Richard and Cynthia Sandoval. I told him they supposedly had properties and successful businesses, but that something in the whole narrative seemed suspicious to me. "Give me a couple of days," Arthur said. I have access to public records. If there's anything to find, I'll find it. 3 days later, Arthur showed up at my house with a manila folder full of documents. His expression was serious as he sat across from me in the living room. Eleanor, what I'm about to tell you isn't pleasant. Tell me anyway. He opened the folder and began to show me documents. Property records, credit reports, court documents. With every page he turned, the image of Chloe's successful family crumbled like a sandcastle under the tide. Richard Sandoval had several businesses over the last 20 years, Arthur explained. They all failed. He has pending lawsuits for unpaid debts. The house they live in isn't theirs. They're renting, and they're 3 months behind. The car he drives, that supposed imported car, is in a finance company's name and has 6 overdue payments. They're about to repossess it. I felt my stomach clench. The properties they supposedly have on the coast never existed. Or if they did, they lost them years ago. Cynthia worked as a manager at a department store, but she was laid off 8 months ago due to cutbacks. She hasn't found another job since. The entire family is being held up by maxed-out credit cards. It was all a lie, I whispered. All this time, it was all a lie. Not only that, Arthur continued, pulling out another document, I found something else. 6 months ago, Richard tried to take out a loan using your son's house as collateral. Your son probably doesn't know, but someone requested information on the property using Ryan's personal data. The application was rejected because they discovered Ryan wasn't the sole owner of the debt, that there were regular transfers from a third person. From you. The air left my lungs. You're saying they tried to use my son's house as collateral for their debts. That's exactly what I'm saying. And there's more. Chloe knew about Ryan's financial difficulties from the beginning. I found emails between her and her mother from 3 years ago where they discussed how to handle the situation with the mother-in-law who had properties and savings. The exact words Cynthia used were, "That woman is your insurance policy. Keep her close, period." I felt sick. I literally had to get up and walk to the window to breathe fresh air. All this time, all these years, it hadn't been a coincidence. It hadn't just been pride or a lack of communication. It had been a plan, a calculated strategy to access my money without my knowledge. Chloe never looked for that perfect job, did she? I asked without turning around. There's no record of her sending out a single resume in 3 years, Arthur confirmed. Eleanor, I think their plan was to eventually get you to put the house in Ryan and Chloe's names together and then use it as collateral to get their family out of debt. I turned to face him. Does Ryan know any of this? I don't think so. From what I saw in the documents, all the communications were between Chloe and her parents. Your son seems to have been a pawn in all this, just as much as you. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those documents, those emails where they called me an insurance policy, where they planned to use my son as a bridge to my money. The rage I felt wasn't hot or explosive. It was cold, calculated, the kind that makes you think with absolute clarity. For years I had blamed myself for not seeing the signs, for being naive. But it turns out there were no signs to see. It had been a trap from the beginning, built with fake smiles and perfectly rehearsed lies. The next morning, I called Ryan. I need you to come to the house. And bring Chloe. It's important. Mom, Chloe still doesn't want to talk to me. She's at her parents' house and... Then tell her that if she doesn't come, I'm going over there. And believe me, Ryan, she'd prefer this conversation to happen in private. There was a long silence. What's wrong? You're scaring me. You should be. I'll see you at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Don't be late. I also called Arthur and asked him to be present. I needed a witness. I needed someone who could legally explain what I had discovered, someone whose word carried weight. At 4 o'clock on the dot, Ryan arrived. He was alone. Chloe says she's not coming, that she has nothing to talk to you about. Then call her right now and put her on speakerphone, I said with a calm that surprised even Ryan. Tell her I have information about her father's attempts to use your house as collateral for fraudulent loans. Tell her I have copies of emails between her and her mother discussing how to manipulate me to access my money. And tell her that if she isn't here in 30 minutes, all that information goes directly to a lawyer to proceed legally. I saw the color drain from Ryan's face. What are you saying? Call her. Ryan took out his phone with trembling hands and dialed. Chloe answered on the third ring. Ryan, I already told you that. Chloe, my mom is here. And she says she has information about your father trying to use our house as collateral, and about emails between you and your mother. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. So long that Ryan checked his phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. I'm on my way, Chloe said finally, and her voice sounded different. Small. Scared. She arrived 25 minutes later, accompanied by her parents. Richard and Cynthia walked into my house with the same arrogance they had always exhibited, but I could see the cracks now. Richard's suit was shiny at the elbows from overuse. Cynthia's purse was a cheap imitation of an expensive brand. Both of their shoes desperately needed cleaning. How had I not seen it before? Because I hadn't been looking. Because I had accepted the narrative they sold me without question. Arthur was already sitting in the living room, his leather briefcase next to him. His presence immediately changed the dynamic of the space. It was no longer a family gathering. It was something official. Thank you for coming, I said without a hint of emotion in my voice. Please, sit down. Chloe looked like she had been crying for days. Her makeup was smudged, her unwashed hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Cynthia kept her chin high, but her eyes darted nervously between Arthur and me. Richard was the only one who tried to maintain the facade. Eleanor, I don't know what this gentleman has told you, he began, gesturing to Arthur with disdain, but I can assure you that. Sit down, Mr. Sandoval, Arthur said in a voice that allowed no argument, and please, refrain from speaking until it's your turn. This is not a negotiation. It is in presentation of facts. Richard opened his mouth to protest, but Cynthia touched his arm, and he sank onto the sofa with a furious expression. Ryan was standing by the door, watching the scene in disbelief. Can someone please explain what is going on? Sit down, son, I said softly. You're going to want to be sitting for this. Arthur opened his briefcase and took out the manila folder. He placed it on the coffee table with a sharp sound that made everyone jump slightly. In this folder are public documents detailing the real financial situation of the Sandoval family, Arthur began. They include credit reports, property records, court documents for unpaid debts, and legally obtained email communications that reveal a pattern of fraud and manipulation. This is ridiculous, Richard blurted out. You have no right to investigate our private lives. Public records are exactly that, public, Arthur replied without flinching. And the email communications were voluntarily provided by a server that detected suspicious activity related to possible identity fraud. But if you'd prefer, I can call the authorities and we can discuss this at a police station instead of in this living room. Richard shut his mouth. Cynthia had begun to cry silently. Let's start with the basics, I continued, taking control of the conversation. You have no properties. You have no successful businesses. The house you live in is a rental, and you're 3 months behind. You have multiple judgments against you for unpaid debts. Your financial situation is desperate and has been for years. Everyone goes through hard times, Cynthia tried to defend, sniffling. That doesn't mean. It means you lied, I interrupted. You lied about who you are. You lied about what you have. And you used those lies to manipulate my son and access my money. I turned to Chloe, who had her head down, unable to look me in the eye. Chloe, you knew from the beginning that Ryan didn't earn enough money to keep the house. You knew I was helping. And instead of feeling gratitude, instead of having the decency to be honest, you coordinated a strategy with your parents to get more money out of me. Keep her close, your mother wrote. She's your insurance policy. Those were her exact words. Not true. Chloe looked up then, her eyes wide with panic. I didn't. That was my mom. I didn't agree with. Here's your reply, Arthur said, pulling out a printout of the email. You're right, Mom. As long as Ryan thinks he can keep me happy, he'll keep asking his mom for help. And she's too proud to admit she can't keep helping. Those are your words, Chloe, dated 2.5 years ago. Ryan stood up so abruptly his chair fell backward. It can't be true. Tell me it's not true, Chloe. Tell me you didn't use me like that. Chloe didn't answer. She just cried, her hands covering her face. And there's more, Arthur continued, relentless. 6 months ago, Mr. Sandoval attempted to obtain information on Ryan's property to use as collateral for a loan. The attempt was detected and rejected, but the intent was there. He was preparing the ground to eventually forge documents and use the house as collateral for his debts. That's a serious accusation, Richard stammered. You have no proof that I have the application with your name and signature, Arthur cut him off. I have the preliminary investigation report from the financial institution, and I have enough evidence to file criminal charges for attempted fraud and identity theft. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Ryan was looking at Chloe as if she were a stranger, as if the 3 years of marriage had evaporated in an instant. Why? He asked finally, and his voice sounded broken. Why did you do this to me? I loved you. I would have done anything for you. Because we're poor, Cynthia suddenly shouted, standing up. Because your mother has money and we don't. Because life is unfair, and sometimes you have to do whatever it takes to survive. Do you think it's easy living in debt? Do you think it's easy watching everything fall apart while others have savings tucked away? Then get jobs, I replied coldly. Cut your expenses. Live within your means. Those are the options honest people have. What honest people don't do is build an elaborate scam using their own daughter as bait. Don't call it that, Chloe pleaded. It wasn't a scam. I do love Ryan. I really do love him. You have a very strange way of showing love, I said. Love is honesty. Love is respect. Love is not turning your partner into an instrument to defraud his mother. Ryan was still standing, motionless, staring at Chloe as if seeing her for the first time. And maybe he was. Maybe he was finally seeing the real person behind the perfect mask she had worn for all these years. I watched him clench his fists at his sides, his jaw tightening as he processed every word, every revelation. 3 years, he said finally, and his voice was trembling with contained rage. 3 years living a lie. 3 years being your puppet while you and your family used me to get to my mother. And the worst part is, I let you do it. I was so stupid, so blind, that I let you treat her like garbage while she was paying for our life. Ryan, please. Chloe held out a hand to him. But Ryan recoiled as if her touch would burn him. Don't touch me. Don't you ever touch me again. Richard stood up then, in one last attempt to maintain some dignity. This is absurd. Come on. Cynthia. Chloe. We don't have to stay here and listen to these ridiculous accusations. Sit down, Mr. Sandoval, Arthur said, his voice so sharp it made even me flinch. Or I can make one phone call, and there will be police officers at this door in 20 minutes. Attempted identity fraud is a federal crime. You could be facing 5 to 10 years in prison. Do you really want to risk walking out that door right now? Richard froze mid-movement. I saw real fear appear in his eyes for the first time. All his pride, all his arrogance, evaporated in an instant. He sank back onto the sofa, suddenly looking like what he really was, a desperate man who had played a dangerous game and lost. What do you want? Cynthia asked in a broken voice. Money? We don't have any money, you know that. Do you want to see us in jail? Would that give you satisfaction? I don't want your money, I replied. And honestly, I don't want to see you in jail, although it's probably what you deserve. What I want is for this charade to end, for the lies to stop, and for each of you to face the consequences of your actions. I turned to Arthur. What are our options, legally? Arthur adjusted his glasses and checked his notes. We can file criminal charges for attempted fraud. That would lead to a formal investigation, possible prison time for Mr. Sandoval, and a permanent criminal record. Or we can reach an agreement where the Sandoval family signs legal documents admitting their actions, promising to have no future contact with Eleanor or Ryan, and renouncing any claim on properties or finances related to this family. And if we don't sign? Richard asked, with one last flicker of defiance. Then I will begin the legal process tomorrow morning, Arthur replied without blinking. And I can assure you that with the evidence I have, not only will you face criminal charges, but every creditor you owe money to will receive copies of these documents. Your reputation, what little is left of it, will be completely destroyed. The civil lawsuits will follow you for decades. I watched Cynthia fall apart. This wasn't manipulative crying. It was the genuine collapse of someone watching her world disintegrate. She clung to Richard's arm, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please," she begged. "Please, don't do this to us. We made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But we're human beings. We're scared. We were desperate. Desperation doesn't justify cruelty," I said firmly. "You didn't just steal money from me. You stole my dignity. You made me small, insignificant, poor in my own generosity. And you did it on purpose, strategically, while planning to steal more." I stood up and walked to the window, needing a moment to gather my thoughts. Outside, the afternoon was fading. The streetlights were beginning to turn on, one by one. There was something poetic about it, about how the darkness revealed the lights that had always been there, waiting for their turn. "I'm going to do something you never did for me," I said without turning around. "I'm going to give you a chance. A single chance you don't deserve." I turned to face them. "You are going to sign the documents Arthur prepared. You are going to admit to everything you did. You are going to promise to stay away from this family permanently. And in return, I will not file criminal charges. You can go on with your lives, even if they are lives full of debt and the consequences of your own actions." "And Chloe?" Cynthia asked, looking at her daughter, who was still looking down. "Chloe is an adult," I replied. "She made her own choices, and now she will have to live with them. But she will no longer be my problem." I turned to my daughter-in-law then. I no longer felt anger toward her, just a deep sadness for all that could have been and never was. "Chloe, you made me feel like I wasn't enough, that my simple life was a source of shame. But the truth is, my simple life is honest. It's real. It's not built on lies and credit cards. I don't need to pretend to be someone I'm not to feel valuable. And maybe that's the difference between us." Chloe finally looked up. Her eyes were red, swollen, filled with a misery that was perhaps the most genuine thing I had ever seen in her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know it's useless now, but I'm sorry. You're right about everything. I was horrible to you. And it wasn't just because of the money. It was because when I looked at you, I saw everything I wasn't. You were real. You were strong, and I was just an empty facade trying to look important. You could have changed that at any time," I told her. "You could have chosen to be honest. But you chose the easy path of a lie. And now, that path has led you here." Ryan came over to me then. He took my hands, and I saw tears rolling down his cheeks. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I was a coward. I chose to protect my pride instead of protecting you. I failed you in the worst ways possible, and if you give me another chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I can be the son you deserve." I hugged him then, because despite everything, he was still my son. He had made terrible mistakes. He had been weak and cowardly, but at least now he could see his faults. At least now he was willing to face them. "You'll have your chance," I whispered. "But things will be different from now on. No more secrets, no more lies, and you're going to have to rebuild your life on your own. I'll be here as your mother, but not as your financial safety net." "I understand," Ryan said, clinging to me, "and I accept that. Completely." Arthur pulled several documents from his briefcase. "These are the legal agreements. I need all three of you to sign: Richard, Cynthia, and Chloe. By signing, you admit to the facts presented today and agree to have no contact with Eleanor or Ryan unless it is through legal representation. You also renounce any claim to properties, inheritances, or financial assets within this family." "And the divorce?" Chloe asked in a barely audible voice, looking at Ryan. Ryan pulled away from me and looked at her directly. "I'm starting the process tomorrow. This marriage was over a long time ago. We just didn't want to admit it." Chloe nodded slowly, accepting the inevitable. Richard took the pen Arthur held out to him. His hands trembled as he signed. Cynthia signed next, her tears staining the paper. And finally Chloe, with an expression of total defeat, added her signature. "One more thing," I said before they could leave. "I want you to know something. I don't hate you. Maybe I should, but I don't. I feel sorry for you. Sorry because you built your lives on lies, and now you have to live in the ruins. I will go back to my modest house, to my simple life, and I will sleep in peace. Will you be able to say the same? No one answered. There was no possible answer. The Sandoval family left my house that afternoon like defeated shadows. Richard no longer walked with the arrogance that used to characterize him. Cynthia clung to his arm, still sobbing, her makeup completely ruined. Chloe was the last to leave, pausing for a moment in the doorway as if she wanted to say something else, but in the end, she just lowered her head and left. Arthur stayed for a few more minutes, organizing the signed documents and making sure everything was in legal order. You did the right thing, he told me before he left. You were more generous than they deserved. I didn't do it for them, I replied. I did it for myself, because I don't want bitterness to consume the rest of my life. I've already wasted enough time being invisible. I'm not going to waste any more time being vengeful. Arthur smiled and gave me a fatherly hug. Your husband would be proud of you. I am. After he left, Ryan and I were alone in the living room. The silence was thick, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who could finally breathe after being underwater for too long. What are you going to do now? I asked him. Ryan rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of complete exhaustion. I don't know. I guess first I have to find a cheaper place to live. The house. I can't keep that house. I don't even want to keep it. Every wall would remind me of the lies. I'm going to sell it, pay off what I owe on the loan, and look for a small apartment I can actually afford on my salary. That's a good plan, I said. An honest plan. I'm going to get a second job, he continued, and there was determination in his voice now. Maybe something part-time at night or on weekends. It won't be easy, but I need to learn to support myself. I need to prove to you that I can do it, that I can be responsible for my own life. You don't have to prove it to me, I said softly. You have to prove it to yourself. Ryan nodded, wiping away a tear that was rolling down his cheek. Yeah, you're right. Do you know what's the saddest part of all this, Mom? That I really did love Chloe. Or at least I loved the person I thought she was. But that person never existed. It was just an act. And I was so stupid I didn't even notice. You're not stupid, I said. You were naive. There's a difference. Naivety is believing the best in people. Stupidity is continuing to believe it after they've shown you otherwise. You, at least, finally opened your eyes. He stayed with me that night. I slept in my room, and I gave him the guest room, that small room that had been his as a child and that I now only used for storing old boxes. I heard him moving around during the night, unable to sleep, processing everything that had happened. And in the morning, when I woke up and went down to the kitchen, I found him making coffee. Good morning, he said with a tired smile. I thought about making breakfast, but then I remembered I'm terrible at cooking. So I just made coffee. I laughed, and it was the first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. The coffee is perfect. We sat at the kitchen table, as we had done so many times over the years. But this time, it was different. There were no secrets between us. There were no lies floating in the air. There was just a mother and her son, finding their way back to each other. Mom, Ryan said after a long sip of coffee, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Always, I replied. Can you forgive me? Really. Not just say the words, but really forgive me in your heart. I looked him in the eyes, those eyes I had known since he was born, and I searched inside myself for the true answer. I've already forgiven you, I said finally. But forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. It means I'm not going to carry the resentment. It means I'm giving you the chance to rebuild our relationship. But that rebuilding will take time, and it will have to be based on actions, not just words. I understand, Ryan said, and I'm willing to do the work, for as long as it takes. The following weeks were a whirlwind of changes. Ryan put the house up for sale and found a buyer surprisingly quickly, a young couple excited to have their first property. The price he got was enough to pay off the bank loan and leave him with a small amount of savings. Not much, but it was an honest start. He found a one-bedroom apartment in a more modest neighborhood, 20 minutes from his job. It was small, with worn linoleum floors and a tiny kitchen, but it had good natural light and was clean. I helped him move, carrying boxes and organizing his few belongings. Chloe didn't show up. She sent a message saying she would send someone to pick up her things later. "It's better this way," Ryan said as we placed his books on a makeshift shelf made of bricks and planks. A clean break. No additional drama. He also kept his promise to get a second job. He found something in a warehouse, physical labor loading and unloading merchandise 3 nights a week. He would come home exhausted, his muscles sore. But there was something different in his eyes. There was pride. The genuine pride of someone earning his own living through honest effort. I, for my part, was also rebuilding. I had made an important decision during those weeks of reflection. I sold one of the properties my husband and I had bought decades ago, a small commercial space we rented out. I invested the money from that sale in a more secure retirement fund and used a portion to do something I had always wanted to do: travel. I had never really traveled. My husband and I had talked about doing it after he retired, but death came before we could fulfill those dreams. And after his death, I had convinced myself it was too late, that I was too old, that it was a waste of money. But now, at 68 years old, I finally understood that it's never too late to live. I booked a 2-week trip to Costa Rica, a guided tour for seniors, with visits to volcanoes, beaches, and nature reserves. I told Ryan about it one evening while we were having dinner together at my house, as we had started to do every Sunday. "Mom, that's amazing," he said with a genuine smile. "You deserve that and so much more. When do you leave?" "In 3 weeks. "I'm nervous," I admitted. "I've never traveled alone. I always thought I needed someone with me." "You'll be fine," Ryan assured me. "You're the strongest woman I know. If you could face Chloe and her parents, you can face anything." The day before my trip, Ryan showed up at my door with a box wrapped in gift paper. "Open it," he said with a shy smile. Inside was a digital camera, a simple one for beginners. "To capture all the moments," he explained. "And maybe, if you want, when you get back, you can show me the pictures and tell me all about your adventure." I hugged him tight, feeling my heart fill with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It was love, yes, but it was also pride. Pride in seeing my son finally becoming the man I always knew he could be. 2 months after that confrontation in my living room, I received a letter. It was from Chloe. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, with my name written in that perfect calligraphy she had always had. I left it on the kitchen table for hours, not daring to open it. Finally, with a cup of tea in hand and the sun setting outside, I broke the seal. The letter was long, handwritten on several pages. Chloe detailed how she had started therapy, how she was finally facing the problems she had ignored for years. She talked about how her parents, and she had always lived beyond their means, how the fear of losing face had led them to make increasingly desperate decisions. She apologized over and over, admitting that no apology could repair the damage she had caused. At the end of the letter, she wrote something that stuck with me. "You showed me what real dignity means. Not the fake dignity that comes from what you own, but the true dignity that comes from how you treat others and how you treat yourself. I wish I had learned that lesson sooner. I wish I had had the courage to be real instead of perfect." I didn't answer the letter, not because I was cruel, but because I felt there was nothing left to say. She was on her own path of healing, and I was on mine. Our paths had crossed, had collided violently, and were now separating. And that was okay. The trip to Costa Rica changed something fundamental within me. It wasn't just the landscape, although the volcanoes and white sand beaches were more beautiful than any photograph could capture. It wasn't just the people I met on the tour, although sharing stories with other seniors who had also decided to finally live their own dreams was comforting. It was something deeper. It was the discovery that I could exist fully without defining myself through others, without being someone's wife, without being the sacrificing mother, without being the invisible mother-in-law. I could just be Eleanor, and that was enough. I returned with hundreds of photographs and a sense of lightness I hadn't experienced in decades. Ryan came to pick me up at the airport, and when he saw me walking out of the terminal with my suitcase and a huge smile on my face, he hugged me with a force that nearly took my breath away. "You look different," he said, studying my face. "You look free." "I feel free," I replied, and it was true. That night, at my house, I showed him all the pictures while we ate the meal I had prepared with fresh ingredients from the market. I told him about the hike through the cloud forest, about the moment I saw a sloth hanging from a tree just feet away, about the night the whole group stayed up on the beach watching sea turtles nest. I met a woman named Elena, I told him. She's 72 years old and just finished her first marathon. She told me something I can't stop thinking about. I spent 50 years waiting for someone else's permission to live my life. I finally realized the only permission I ever needed was my own. Period. Ryan smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes. I wish it hadn't taken you so long to give yourself that permission, Mom. I wish I hadn't been part of what held you back. Don't torture yourself with the past, I said, touching his hand. What's done is done. What matters is what we do now. And right now, we're both choosing to live with honesty. That's what matters. The following months brought more changes, all of them positive. Ryan received a promotion at his job, not huge but significant. With the pay raise and his savings from the second job, he was finally able to quit the night job at the warehouse. He still lived in his small apartment, but now he had turned it into a real home. He had hung pictures on the walls, bought plants for the windows, even adopted a cat from a local shelter. His name is Chance, he told me when he introduced me to the orange cat purring in his lap. Because this is my second chance, and I'm not going to waste it. The divorce from Chloe was finalized without drama. She didn't ask for anything beyond her personal belongings. She had finally gotten a job, something modest in an administrative office, and had rented a small studio in another part of the city. I learned through Ryan that she had cut contact with her parents, that she needed distance to heal. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that, just a quiet sadness for a family that had self-destructed with lies. As for Richard and Cynthia, I learned from Arthur that they had finally declared bankruptcy. They lost the house they were renting, lost the car, lost everything. They moved into subsidized housing and both found temporary jobs where they could. It was a hard fall, but perhaps a necessary one. Sometimes, people can only rebuild after hitting rock bottom. I kept traveling. After Costa Rica came a Caribbean cruise with a group of friends I had made at a book club. Then a trip to the Mayan ruins in Guatemala. Every trip taught me something new, not just about the world, but about myself. I learned that I loved adventure, that I wasn't as afraid of the unknown as I had thought, that solitude could be company when you embraced it instead of fearing it. I also started volunteering at a community center, teaching other older women how to use computers and the internet. Many of them had stories similar to mine. Lives dedicated to others, gradual invisibility, a loss of their own identity. Seeing their eyes light up when they learned to send their first email or make a video call with a distant grandchild filled me with a purpose I didn't know I needed. One spring afternoon, almost a year after that dinner that changed everything, Ryan came to visit me with someone. It was a woman his age, with short brown hair and a genuine smile. Her name was Leah, and she worked as an engineer at the same company as Ryan, though in a different department. "Mom, I wanted you to meet Leah," Ryan said, and there was nervousness in his voice but also hope. "We've been seeing each other for a few months. Nothing serious yet. We're taking things slow, but, well, it's important to me that you meet her." Leah shook my hand firmly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Eleanor. Ryan has told me so much about you, about your strength, your kindness, and your incredible collection of travel photos." I liked her immediately. There was something genuine about her, something unpretentious. The three of us sat in the living room and talked for hours. Leah told me about her work, about how she had grown up in a working-class family, about how she valued honesty above all else because she had seen what lies could destroy. Ryan told me what happened with his ex-wife, she said at one point, looking me directly in the eye. "And I want you to know that I would never be capable of something like that. My parents taught me that dignity doesn't come from what you have, but from how you treat people, and I can see that you understand that better than anyone." When they left that night, I felt hope for my son for the first time in a long time. Maybe this time he had found someone real, someone who valued him for who he was, not for what he could provide. Someone who would see me as a person, not as a walking bank. Today, as I write this mentally, sitting in my favorite armchair with a cup of tea and my new cat named Liberty sleeping at my feet, I realize how much my life has changed. It's been 18 months since that dinner. 18 months since I finally found my voice after years of silence. My relationship with Ryan is stronger than ever, but in a different way. It's now a relationship of equals, adult to adult, built on mutual respect and honesty. He comes for dinner every Sunday, sometimes alone, sometimes with Leah. We talk about everything: his work, my travels, his future plans, and when he mentions he's struggling financially with something, he asks me for advice, but never for money. And I give him the advice gladly, proud to see how he's learned to solve his own problems. I've learned that love doesn't require constant sacrifice, that you can love deeply without losing yourself in the process, that setting boundaries isn't selfishness, it's survival, that true family is built on honesty, not on secrets and convenient lies. I've also learned that it's never too late to start over. At almost 70 years old, I am finally living the life I always wanted but never allowed myself to have. I travel, I have friends, I have hobbies, I have an identity beyond mother and wife. And it's liberating in ways I never imagined possible. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never confronted Chloe that night. If I had remained invisible, swallowing my words, silently paying for a life that wasn't mine, I probably would still be doing it today. I probably would have died one day without ever having truly lived, without ever knowing who Eleanor was beyond the roles she played for others. But it didn't happen that way. I found my voice. And that voice freed me from a prison I had built myself with good intentions and misunderstood love. If there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that family shouldn't break you. It shouldn't make you smaller so others can feel big. It shouldn't require your invisibility as the price of belonging. True family sees you, values you, honors you. And if the family you were born into, or the one you built, doesn't do that, then you have the right, even the duty to yourself, to create new boundaries or even new families. And if this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt that your generosity became your invisibility, if you've stayed silent when you should have spoken, I want you to know something. It's never too late to find your voice. It's never too late to set boundaries. It's never too late to choose your own dignity over a false peace. True peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict. It comes from living in alignment with your values, from being honest with yourself and others, from knowing you deserve respect just as much as you give it. And if I am at peace today, if I sleep well at night, if I wake up every morning with gratitude instead of resentment, it's because I finally learned that taking care of myself isn't selfish. It's the foundation from which I can love others in a healthy way. Because in the end, the most important lesson I learned is this: you can't pour from an empty cup. And for years, I emptied myself completely trying to fill others. Now, I fill myself first. And from that fullness, I can share with others without losing myself in the process. That is my story. The story of how I stopped being invisible. And if anyone needs to hear it today, I hope they find it at the exact moment they need it most.